Hello, welcome back to Playful Nature podcast. Today's guest is someone we've been hoping to bring on since day one, to be honest, pretty much why we started the podcast. It is Cormac Russell, who is just a leading voice in community-led development and an advocate for place-based solutions, someone whose work has profoundly shaped the way that we think about health and social connection and building a sort of sense of community well-being. A little bit about Cormac. He's the founder of Nurture Development and a faculty member of Asset-Based Community Development, ABCD Institute at DePaul University in Chicago. He's spent the best part of 25 odd years working in various different countries, helping communities rediscover their strengths and building resilience from the ground up. Today's episode, Andrew sat down with Cormac and they talk about why well-being isn't just about services and institutions, but it's about relationships and autonomy and choice and feeling like we're part of something. They talk about how modern life has eroded community and how we can rebuild it, why the fitness industry often focuses on individualism and kind of misses the bigger picture, how movement and health and belonging are all deeply connected, and why we don't just need services, we need to feel like we matter and we need to feel like we're part of something bigger than ourselves. This conversation I've just really enjoyed, I've just listened back to it myself and really enjoyed it. If you like what you hear from Cormac, he has got some great books. The article that we often refer people to in our reading lists is the one entitled "We Don't Have a Health Problem, We Have a Village Problem." That is a really good place to start. Put a lot of links in the show notes and you can read all about Cormac's work, and hopefully you'll get a lot out of this. We're really, really thankful to Cormac for coming on. Let's get going.
How to stand on shifting sand. How to bend but stay intact.
Okay. Well, today I have a guest that I'm really excited about. Honestly, when Jill and I first started the podcast, it was one of the people we first wanted to get on. So I feel very grateful that he was able to make some time. So today we have Cormac Russell, who I think a lot of our listeners will already be familiar with, but then I think there'll probably be a few who actually aren't familiar with Cormac and his work. So what I'd like to do is just say hello to Cormac and just allow him to talk, maybe introduce himself, and then we'll pull some questions out. So Cormac, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. I know this is a hard question, but who are you, or how would you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for making space for us to be in conversation together. So how would I introduce myself? There's so many different ways into that, but maybe for the listener who's interested in community, I'd say primarily I am known as the founder of a little social enterprise called Nurture Development. And while we're based in Ireland, we work, very fortunate really to work in a lot of different countries and communities around the world. So about 38 countries across time. That was established in 96. And then I suppose the other thing I'm known for is my work around asset-based community development, and really they're overlapping. So I'm a faculty member of an institute that's based out at DePaul in Chicago, DePaul University, or at least they host the institute. And that's been a lot of fun too. So those two hats, I guess, overlap, but that might be a good way of at least giving people a hand.
That segues into my next question, which is really about asset-based community development. This is a model that some of our listeners might be familiar with. They might not be familiar with it, but really, I think it'd be great if we could just talk about that. But then also, asset-based community development, it really exists as sort of as a foil or in a contrast to some traditional models of development. So I was wondering if you could just briefly talk about asset-based community development to kind of set the background for the conversation.
Yeah, happy to. I think one of the things that's probably useful for people and maybe interesting for people to know is that ABCD is more a description of how we've seen communities or how communities have told us they are powerful or they're effective. I'd say it's more a description than a model. And that's, I think, a useful distinction to make because, the joke, all models are wrong and some are useful.
Yeah.
So, but I think what's more useful about the idea of a description is that it doesn't then become, you can hold it loosely. It doesn't become an imposition or a kind of an imperial edict. This is the right way to do things and everything else is the wrong way to do things. I think what it lifts up in a lot of ways is interesting in that I think ABCD, asset-based community development, is saying what a lot of wisdom traditions say when it comes to flourishing or when it comes to development or when it comes to living community life, which is that if you want things to go well and to sustain, endure over time, then the people who live in the place where development is going to happen really need to have autonomy, collectivity, and choice and control. That's what leads to cohesion, that leads to belonging, and it leads to flourishing. That, in other words, says that development can't be imposed on people. You can't manipulate people to do it because you know what's good for them. They've got to want to. They've got to go through a process of figuring out what they want and how those wants can be collectivized. And then they've got to be primary investors in the doing of that. Okay. So I would argue that these are basic tenets of community development. These are basic tenets of good education. These are basic tenets of good health, right? So in a lot of ways, they cut across, and you could maybe say under the umbrella of well-being or flourishing, all of these principles sit. So it's less a foil to any other community approach or any other growth approach. I mean, in the sense of growth, not in the sense of bigness. I mean, in the sense of flourishing. I think it's less a foil and more a reminder of what we all fundamentally know is authentic growth and what happens when things move into grotesque scale or outgrowth, and the harm that can do to people, place, and planet. So, yeah, I sense that might be a more useful way of framing it for people. And then it becomes less about converting people to a model and more about, just consult your own lived experience. Where have you experienced growth that's authentic? And you'll see those principles.
That is actually a really helpful distinction because in what we do with physical movement, we actually spend quite a lot of time struggling with the tension of prescriptive models in terms of how people should move physically. And again, more descriptive models, or a lot of times what's called an ecological approach, but it sometimes would have a different connotation from when other people use ecological approach. And it's sort of the same thing. It's really a description of how people move, and also just seeing how, as organisms, as systems, we're very good at self-organizing in ways that sort of solve problems or address, this embodied existence that we have. So actually the distinction you made about not being a model, but really being more of a description, I think fits really well with what we're trying to do. And I think that's important to clarify. Well, then I guess within that, this idea of asset-based community development, this idea of it really being reflection of what flourishing communities have, and we, for whatever reason, when we teach our courses, we tend to use PERMA model quite a lot, Martin Seligman's model. But obviously, because a lot of these flourishing models are descriptors, we see a lot of the same things, like you said, elements of choice, these cross connections in communities, so on and so forth. And I guess within that, I should talk about how I first came across your ideas. One of your articles was shared with me, and it's sort of turned into one of the seminal articles that we share with our students as well. And your piece, "We don't have a health problem, we have a village problem," which I think is really one of the fun. It's really, when I read that, I think I was at the right time in the right place, because I'd already been reading a lot of Wendell Berry. I'd already been reading a lot of Ivan Illich, and then you just sort of click things together. Would you mind, without putting you on the spot, would you mind sort of describing the points you're making in that piece?
I'd be happy to. So I think a way of reflecting on change, however, we're trying to affect it, or be useful within the change effort, a way of thinking about it is to ask, who within that effort are the principal actors? So that's one question. The second question I might ask is, and within that again, who are the agents that are acting on behalf of those principal actors, right? So what's the principal, what's the agent? And then the third question is, what's the arena, right? So principal, agent, and arena. And I guess what I was saying in the article is, if you think about health as where the principal actor is the institution, the agents kind of come in the form of service providers, and the arena is the specialism, the theater and the hospital if it's a surgeon, or, the dance class if it's a physical exercise piece, or whatever it might be. Then I guess what I was asking people to consider is, are not to make it good or bad, but are these the only principal actors? Are these the only agents? Are these the only arenas within which health can flourish? Okay. And I quite obviously in the article say, well, no, actually, that health, for the most part, if we take seriously the social determinants of health, and I would add social and political determinants of health, so we don't end up whitewashing it, I think we would say, well, actually, it's pretty clear that the science and the evidence tells us that when it comes to flourishing and well-being, and not just the absence of illness, then, well, community cohesion, community belonging, and community power, autonomy, choice, and control really, really matter. And they have a massive impact. Alongside other issues like structural inequity, they have massive impacts on people's health outcomes, their longevity, and the extent to which they flourish across their life course. So what I was saying is, and it's slightly tongue-in-cheek when I say we don't have a health problem, we have a village problem. I think what I'm trying to do is to say to people that we need to get beyond thinking about healthcare as a set of services and think about health in the broader scope, the broader sweep of the fact that health is something that doesn't just happen inside of our skin, it happens outside of our skin. It's structural, but it's also deeply and profoundly economic, environmental, and very local. And so that idea, in a way, was just kind of a hook to say, well, if we thought less elementally, less in silos, and we thought more interdependently, but not in a way that's trying to pull the entire planet together, so we kind of default into, we've got to change the world before we can do anything. I was suggesting that an arena of change, a unit of health, and Wendell Berry talks about this as well, that it's a nonsense to think of the individual, the sick individual, as a unit of health. That a unit of health is the place and all of its creatures. And that, of course, includes, in a supplementary functional sense, institutions that serve that place. But thinking about the neighborhood or a small bounded unit, could be a favela. It could be, Kibera in Nairobi, a slum in Nairobi, so however people live the life of the local, what Illich would call the vernacular life, what others have called the life world. So with that sense of that which is outside, maybe not the surveillance, but outside the control of institutions, which is to say they don't have a monopoly on producing that which creates health. And they don't. It's not because it's not a product to be consumed.
Yes.
So you could say on balance that we will realize greatest health possibilities if we begin to get better alignment between the communities we live in and the institutions that serve them. And currently there's a misalignment in an awful lot of the places I work in anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think it's not the question I was going to ask next, but I think that's probably a good segue. This idea of a misalignment. So maybe the structures or the incentives that are sort of built in, or just maybe emerge from the system, such as it is. You say that there's a misalignment perhaps between communities and this more holistic idea of health and some of the institutions or the forces these communities find themselves embodied in. Could you talk about that a little bit more? Maybe give some examples of these misalignments?
Yeah. Well, I suppose the first thing to say is just in order to be hopeful and affirmative is just that this does not have to be inevitable. And there's plenty of promising practice that moves in good faith, I think, to a more optimal alignment, which, in terms of body and adaptive complex systems, we're all moving to some kind of equilibrium or homeostasis. So a lot of our institutions do too, but often they get their regulation through bureaucracy or through, certain kinds of status quo. Because that's often where we're trying to get to in our bodies, even, trying to get to a status quo. So in a way, this changes the status quo a little, and it says that actually we get to regulate in a much better way if instead of supplanting the health creating capacities of communities, we supplement them within our institutional offer. So it just basically says we're not bringing health to the community, we're joining health in the community, and then we're supplementing with our assets in the institutional world that which the community cannot do, either on its own or with a little bit of community development. So the alignment piece would basically almost look like this, to just be straightforward about it. And then I'll give some examples. The alignment piece would be almost like a 3-lane swimming pool, okay, where it could be health, it could be safety, it could be education. I see you have the wonderful John Holt's book behind you.
Yeah.
So he talked about, teaching our own. So it's this idea that really in the first lane of the swimming pool, there are things that people can do if you support them to get connected and organized at community level, which are profoundly consequential when it comes to health, in terms of well-being, but also in terms of, moving towards the absence of illness, right? So it's both, because you kind of we've got to put, the illness on one axis, if you like, and then languishing and flourishing on another, so we're not one-dimensional people. That's the point. People and community are not one-dimensional. And where things get bent out of shape or misaligned is where we start pretending that which is complex is one-dimensional, right? And actually, we put our staff at harm as well. We put them in harm's way. I think it explains an awful lot of burnout. So that first lane of the swimming pool is not about provision of services. It's about the animation of community health creation, right? That's the first thing. And it's mainly something that communities can do themselves. It's almost like, if you think about it, it's like, what do we try to do in health with vaccines? We're trying to animate the immune system, the health creating capacity and health, also resilience against infection. Okay. So we're animating the body's intrinsic capability. What I have learned over 30 years and more is that actually, without sounding too woolly, in a way, this is metaphorical, not literal, for scientists who are listening in a way, you could argue that the neighborhood is like an organism, and that it has, when well organized, a proxy immune system. Okay? So what you're really trying to say to health creators, and then people are really cottoning on to this idea, there's a lot of light touch enablement you can do, which really is helpful in animating that immune system or that prophylactic. And another way of thinking about this is in terms of justice and equity. If people are sick because they're poor, deal with the poverty, getting solidarity around that. If racial inequity is the issue, deal with the issue. So it's one of the principles of, medical science is get to the root of the issue. Don't be fooled by the symptom. Yeah. So in any case, I don't want to over-philosophize this. The second lane of the swimming pool is where I think folks who are maybe a little bit more localized, maybe primary care folks, people who are closer into the lives of not just the people they serve, but where those people live, are really trying to figure out what are some of the light touch ways we can get alongside people and be in relationship with them, where we're on tap, not on top. So we're honoring their autonomy, their capabilities to lead, but we're a little wind at the sail of that endeavor. So people have different words for that. And there's all kinds of rich and I think really quite beautiful wisdom traditions around co-design, co-production, and so forth. But it's really, I think, about humility and not claiming that the institution has a monopoly. And so it's a really nice renegotiation of the social contract. We are going to support you, and we will be with you, and we'll be proximate. We're very comfortable that you're in the lead. And so that's the second lane. You could say in simple terms, the first lane is health done by people. Yep. Second lane is health done by people with a little bit of support, right? So that could be community development, that could be coaching, that could be, all occupational therapy, so really in the community, it could be, yesterday I was speaking with some paramedics who are working in a different way with people who regularly use their service to begin to say, can we connect those people? What is actually going on? Why are they regularly calling? Is it loneliness? Is it isolation? Are there other issues? And of course, the answer is yes. So, and then the third lane is, look, there are times when I need that ambulance to bring me to hospital and I need a life-saving surgery, right? And we don't want to do anything to harm that. In fact, what we want to do is free that up so it can be most responsive at the point of greatest need. And so the third lane of the swimming pool is we need things done for us in order to be healthy and to be well and to flourish. We need an enabling state. We need a multi-party democracy. We need our, government systems to flourish. And we can't take those freedoms for granted. Yeah. Particularly, as we've seen in the last few months, it's now possible that a handful of people can buy an election. Mm-hmm. Multi-party democracy, and seemingly get away with it. Yeah. And so, just there's significant things happening. Romania, the election just before Christmas there, something like 10 million bots were removed from just TikTok that were involved in trying to influence elections. So all of these things are of a piece in a sense. Yeah. Very, very wide and very, very local. And of course, it's global in that sense. It's a fusion. But in that third lane of the swimming pool, there are things we need done for us that communities need. We need our refuse collected every Thursday, Tuesday, or Monday, or whenever it is. So these things have to be able to speak to each other. And I guess what I'm talking about here is a bit of a virtuous sequence. That if you're really interested in kind of the principle of subsidiarity, where no bigger institution or no bigger entity will do that, which a smaller entity can do, then what you would do is you'd take care to start the first lane of the swimming pool. Before I move in and I risk engaging in overreach, let me find out what the health creating capacities or actualities are in this community. And let me make sure I do no harm to them first. Okay? It's exactly what you would do with an individual, right? If you know that somebody can, is mobile with the aid of something, you're not going to then take that aid away and put them in a wheelchair and push them, because that's disabling. Calling that help is disingenuous. And ultimately, you're talking about Illich earlier on, Andrew. Ivan Illich would have invoked the term which is used in medicine of iatrogenesis, which is doctor-caused or physician-caused or clinician-caused harm, not intentionally, though that can happen too. But there are side effects to health. There are side effects to our intervention. So what those three lanes do is they put up some guardrails around that. And they say, I can't know what a person or their community needs until I first know what they have. And once I know what they have, then I can really work in a much more elegant, sensitive, ecologically sound, ethically appropriate, and I would argue, health-centered way.
Yeah, that's good. You probably saw me. I was taking a lot of notes there, and it's just thinking about the sort of the lane metaphor. And I think sometimes I find myself spending so much time thinking about the first two lanes. You read your David Graeber and your Ivan Illich and your James Scott and things like that. That I think I often forget how important that third lane is of the sort of these functioning, higher level systems, democracies and things like that. It has been interesting to see the discourse on the internet over the last few years of, I think, certain groups kind of picking and pulling on people's suspicion towards, bigger organizations, towards institutions and things like that. And I think it's become apparent to me recently that, though I think there are fair criticisms to be made about the world as it hopefully works right now, or, obviously people can talk about, he can use some term like neoliberalism or something like that and to sort of be dismissive of it. But, we have had a system that to some degree has worked for better or for worse. And now looking at a world where perhaps those systems aren't there anymore, I sort of wonder what happens when we lose certain gatekeepers. I would like to bring the conversation down to a few specifics, because as you were talking about that, there are so many ways I could go with that. But I sort of would like to talk about, if we're going to have a conversation about health, I think there are a few, maybe elephants in the room isn't the right thing to talk about, but I think there's a few models or assumptions we can discuss. And one of them is private health industry, the fitness industry. If we think about things like gyms, influencers online, and sort of the discussion about health and fitness there, almost quite literally health as a product, as you talked about earlier. And then I know this is a big pivot from there, but I think it would also be interesting to talk about the ideas and assumptions under this push for social prescribing and this idea of health and where it sits in the community versus where it sits in a medical system. So those are two big and separate ideas, and I was wondering if you could focus on one and then the other. So really, essentially, I think you have some awareness of the fitness industry as it exists, and I think you understand perhaps what problems it's trying to solve. But also, I think you're probably aware that there are kind of probably some limitations in the models that we have. So I was wondering if you could talk about your observations about the private fitness industry, and then also talk about social prescribing, please.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the private fitness side of things in the industry as it stands at the moment, it's a relationship that's based on transaction. That's a kind of an amoral observation. I don't want to get into just automatically jumping to the assumption that that's necessarily bad, because there are plenty of gyms that are actually run by communities, in communities. And so, there are many different governance models by which a gym or, an offer specifically for people who are interested in engaging at that level can make, but most of them are private, for profit, and their business model is almost contingent on the number of people who don't show up. So, notwithstanding, I think that they're part of the market world, they're part of the market system. So, if you wanted to be, and I think we have to avoid shaking our fist at the sky and cursing the darkness. But there is a sense of saying, well, okay, what might be some of the risks? Like, a way of thinking about it is if you imagined, right, that was the only entry point into a lifestyle change or choice, right? If that's a way of thinking about these things critically. Say, okay, well, let's take it to scale and let's imagine it was a monopoly. Would it be benign? I would contest that most people, would only have to give this a couple of minutes thought to see that there would be all kinds of built-in risks to the well-being of society if that was the only entry point into health and well-being. There's equity issues, there's race issues, there's probably gender affirming issues. So there's lots of different considerations. So I think it's one in a very mixed, and a very kind of almost polyculture kind of way. If it was part of a very diverse set of offers, it probably would coexist and it'd be fine. So the issue is less about what it is or it isn't intrinsically, and more about scale, I think, and diversity of choice. I don't want to get drawn in ever in a conversation about, say a market offer is intrinsically good or bad. I think what's problematic is monopoly and syndicalization, where that then people become a hostage to fortune within that. And, and that's one of the things that's hard about talking about the online side of things and, the digital apps that people are sold around this time of year as they make New Year's resolutions and whatever, which often kind of pull people into a private conversation about trying to make change happen from within themselves. My experience certainly is that change, well, that inside piece is important. That change often happens between people rather than within me. So it's more a we conversation, actually. And so, I think one of the things about sort of running on your treadmill in a gym, away from your community, away from your family, away from others, is that it is one way of getting to wellness amidst many others. And it wouldn't be my chosen way. And my experience is that's probably true for a lot of people if they had more choice. Yes. But it could be that the industry is sort of enjoying what I would call any port in a storm. Then the question becomes, well, okay, so if we had more diversity and there was more of an opportunity that I didn't have to leave my community. Say I live in a rural area and the reason I'm in a gym is because there are no pathways on which to walk in my community, and therefore I can't meet people in my community. There are no third places. There's nowhere to sit down. Nobody thinks of organizing, a forest school in my neighborhood, even though there's a forest behind us. And, it's £2,000 a year to send my child somewhere into what's called a forest school, which is being contrived as a business. Then that's a failure of diversity, really, in the system, and it's about imagination. It's also an opportunity. Okay, so one of the things that might be an opportunity is to grow community alternatives to the private market offer. Not that we go against the private market offer; it is what it is. But if we're not happy with that monopoly, then the best way to respond to monopoly is create choice. Right now, that's a lot of work. because that's a challenge to legislators. It's a challenge to commissioners. It's a challenge to me. If I want choice, it's also a challenge to me. But I need to be in a structure and in an environment that doesn't advantage the private offer over me. So taking your work, Andrew, and Jill's work, how can we create an environment within which those community alternatives are allowed to flourish, are encouraged actually to flourish, as opposed to advancing and advantaging the monopolies. And again, that's a nice way of thinking about things, because it's not an either or, it's not binary. It's about, no, we want diversity of choice. My experience in community work is that a lot of people quite enjoy the opportunity of getting connected locally, particularly in communities where there's economic marginality and systematic decades of disinvestment in terms of transport infrastructure and other such things, or because there's fear, right? There may be fear among some of the local young people crossing over the tracks, as it were, and going in. And it may be grounded in very, very real concerns about gang violence or, such like. So organizing for people to actually get together and move more in whatever way they want, that could be moving around an issue that they care about, as well as, physical activity per se. And it doesn't really matter, I think is really, really important. Incidentally, if I may, I think there's another way into this conversation. So I know we're talking about, at the moment, sport and health and fitness, but it strikes me that actually there's almost an implicate level or a meta level to this conversation. So we could, for example, talk about literacy. And in much the same way, so where do you go to become literate? You go to a school, right? Okay, well, really? Well, actually, where do people learn literacy? They learn it in their homes, they learn it in their communities, so it actually, in truth, does take a village, right? Now, I would say, I recently had a wonderful conversation with somebody who's doing interesting work around literacy. And they were saying, well, we want to end illiteracy. I said, okay, let's wind back here for a second. Because in the same with sport, we want to end, we have a war against, languishing or lack of mobility or whatever. But I'm saying, what do you think is the opposite of literacy? And they said, well, that's illiteracy, obviously. And I said, no, the opposite of literacy is orality. And so you said, what's the opposite of physical activity? Well, it may be languishing, or it may be that people care about something and they're manifesting movements that are different than what would come up on our dashboard. So while they may not necessarily get engaged in physical activity, and I think there's a great teaching in this from Paulo Freire in Pedagogy of the Oppressed, where he reflects on the story of a gentleman in a village in Brazil who was really angry. I think it was around water being siphoned off by a business from the local wells. And that was his motivation to use literacy in order to conscientize, to become active as a citizen, and to begin to kind of open up some contestation around that injustice. But coming in with flashcards or trying to teach this person how to read and write wasn't the right entry point. So in a sense, just put in the same way with activity, and this is why a lot of the private gyms don't work, because actually intrinsically, people that move and choose to move are doing so because there's something they care about enough to act upon. So on January 1st, I may have an opinion that I need to exercise more, lose a few pounds, etc., and I download an app, or if I'm a bit embarrassed about my body shape, I don't want to go to the gym, so I download an app. That's a whole other expression of the private industry, right? You can just do it at home, and it's on your own with the phone, whatever, or I go to the gym. That's one way of having conversation. I don't think that's me telling you what I care about enough to act. I think that's me saying to myself, I have an opinion about what I and others might need to do. And I don't know that that's the same as commitment. But when we get into communities and we really listen to what they care about, I think that opens up a real avenue to autonomous growth and development, out of which movement comes. But it's movement that's driven intrinsically by the person and, their place and their community, rather than some kind of a market-based narrative. So it's different. Like I say, I was very careful about saying I don't want to contest the two against each other.
Yeah.
But sometimes in modern life, it does feel like the marketplace is quite overwhelming and all-consuming, and it feels like it's the only choice. Well, it's not. I mean, what you and Jill are doing are proof of that, and we've got lots of other examples. So let's create more choice. If you're a commissioner, just be careful about what you're commissioning. Now, in terms of social prescribing, if you're in a context, right, as a social prescriber, which is very market-oriented, where the only real options are somewhere between the market and you as an individual. You have a deficiency, a damage, or a problem. That's the narrative that's often used. You need to change your body size, or you need to do this, or you need to do that. So you're not fitting some kind of ideal standard of what good looks like, right? So a lot of this narrative is quite sizist, quite, non-gender affirming. There's all kinds of problems, if you like. So it's a very pathology-based language. You are a unit of pathology, but hey, here's the solution. And if you're a social prescriber, you don't want to really be in the midst of that kind of signposting people. What you want is to get alongside folks and support them to flourish. And so I think that's less about signposting, and it is more about discovering what the person cares enough about to act upon, what their gifts are, what their capabilities are, what they would like to share, and then finding places in that community that can receive those gifts. Because often the difficulty is I might have a gift inside of me, but I might be, because of trauma or confidence or whatever, barriers to opportunity, I might not be in a position where I can share that gift. Or I might be willing to, but because of things that have happened in the past, maybe I've just come out of prison. And so in my mind, I've learned the skill of cooking, but I'm going into a neighborhood where the only building in the neighborhood that has any resources is the probation center, where, because I'm unlicensed, I'm not, by the way, but, I'm making metaphorical analogy, just to be clear. And if I was, so be it. But that's my challenge, right? If I'm in that situation, I see they've got an industrial kitchen here, and there's nowhere in my community to get a nice breakfast and meet people for coffee. And yet I can't start the conversation with that institution. Say, why don't we set up a social enterprise here? Myself and 20 of the guys who come from prison have done cookery courses, and, we could be an asset to our community. So these are the ways, and I guess the possibilities that are lying languishing. They're right under our nose. So the challenge that a social prescriber or anybody who's lucky enough to get a salary and be in a community has is not to signpost people to projects or activities, but to support the building of connections for gift exchange, which results in this kind of experience of people being able to say, I belong. I'm missed on the days I don't show up. I get the opportunity to contribute meaningfully to other people. I matter. I can make change happen. And I believe in myself in this place and the people here. I think we can be powerful. Now, if I had that as a story in my head, I think the whole self-care industry and self-management industry would stop sounding so moral to me. You have a responsibility to self-manage because we're running out of money in the NHS. Who cares, right? I could barely make ends meet, so, but if I've got a sense of agency that comes not just from inside my skin, but comes from the culture of people caring about each other, about the place, and about the democracy, and indeed the parts that don't work in it, and are prepared to use collective action. Then when I go for a walk with them, or when, we do a fundraiser, or when we, say, well, let's set up a summer sports program so that all the kids can be involved. I do that, and as a consequence, flourishing emerges, not just for me, for my kids, my family, and for my wider community. That is a net result that I don't think you get from going to the gym.
I've got a few points I want to discuss here. I think I've got about 6 or 7 pages of notes from that. I think, I guess one of the latest things that you said that I think is really important, I think is worth sort of restating and discussing, is this feeling, that people matter, is making this transition from I'm providing a service to we're developing a community asset together. There's a sense of reciprocity as opposed to transaction, which I think is so important. And, a lot of the flourishing literature will talk about this. While it's great to have people who do things for you, it's even better to feel like you can do things for other people. As you said, to feel like if I'm not here, I will be missed. I have something to contribute. And I think that is one of the things I'm finding that's really interesting, is because, we sort of wear two hats, in that we have a private organization, which is franchise-based, and people come to us. And then we also have a community free at point of service thing. And I'm sort of aware of the tensions and trying to come into a community and saying, look, we're providing this for you because I understand the limitations of that way of looking. And whenever I'm speaking with new coaches or people who are interested in this, that's one of the things I really try to convey, is that we need to get away from this idea of providing a service, and how is it that we can actually create this sense of community. And the reason I say that is because I think we've both seen all these great, I'm going to use the word intervention, all these great interventions or ideas that work when they have a specific champion, or work when they have, someone who's particularly passionate or something like that. But we always have this issue of sustainability, where that person disappears or that pot of funding disappears. And then all of a sudden, this thing that really looked like a robust and resilient part of the community just seems to crumble. And I guess, how much time do we have? Do you want to finish on the hour, or?
Need to finish on the hour.
Sure. Well, then let's just go with that then. So,
yeah, okay. So
I'll hand that back to you.
It's a great one. So, a couple of different ways into this, I think, conceptually, just to kind of get a grip on it, and then we can talk about application. So I suppose the first thing is, language kind of snags us sometimes, but if what we're talking about is less about the provision of a service and more about precipitating social capital, right? So the people are there not to provide a service necessarily in the classic sense, but to precipitate people who live in the community, members of that community, to do things they say they want. So it's a kind of an animating role, support without direct kind of thing. And yes, you have a set of skills, but you're being very careful to foreground the capabilities of the people that you're with. So it's a very particular way of working. Another way of thinking about this is E.F. Schumacher talked a lot about appropriate technology. So his argument in Small is Beautiful was not that we should get rid of technology and go back to, the hand-drawn, whatever plows or whatever it might be, but that we should have appropriate scale technology. So technology that doesn't do harm to the local, doesn't do harm to people. So kind of people first, AI second kind of principle. The technology has utility, if it's supplementary or it augments. But if it starts to overwhelm or displace or diminish or sometimes do even more fundamental harms, then clearly something is out of balance. I think in the same way, the people that, you're, if you like, in sort of an economic relationship with, I think are trying to be in that appropriate technology sphere. They're trying to say, how can we get alongside folks in a way that is legacy building for them, and then sort of moving back. So I think of community organizers, community development workers, and they're in a similar kind of vein. I'm working on a book at the moment that's talking a little bit about the need for community, for almost the resurgence of community animators. So in France, for a period of time, there was a movement called community animateurs, and an equivalent movement in Italy in around about the 60s called community animatura, Ture. And again, it was this recognition that if we stand back and do nothing, right, community isn't just going to happen. The modern life is perfectly organized to rip us apart. And if you need evidence on that, I can kind of point you in the direction of several countries right now where the erosion of democracy is plain to see, and we'll miss it when it's gone. So there is a contestation here. And I think some people in their roles are trying to do things which are beyond volunteering, right? And they're bringing a skill set, they're bringing an ethic and a posture, and that they would earn a dignified income to do that. I'm all for that. I'm all for that. I, like so many other people, dream of, getting beyond fossil fuels, getting beyond money, but we are where we are. And in my line of work, I work with the world as it is, not as I dream it to be one day. I will work to get to that preferred future with people. But, people are working currently with a flawed system called the money-based economy. Maybe, we can get paid in cryptocurrency, and it's another debate, right? I don't want to get into it. But so I think it's about, the question is, okay, so I'm in a community, I'm being paid to do something. What am I not going to do to be helpful? What functions am I going to be really careful not to appropriate? Because I see institutions and professionals all around me that are engaged in professional dominance or overreach or overwhelm. I want to be one of those that is ethical, that's proportionate in the way I support. That's hard. That's really hard to do that. To do that well, you need to be constantly reflecting on your practice. You need to be deeply paying attention to what the community is saying to you. And I think that's the work we really, well, certainly it's the work I'm committed to. I know you are. But I think that's the work that needs to flourish. So it's not an either or. It's not, well, we're just going to pull all resources out of community and just rewild them, see what happens. Yeah. Maniacal experiment. Because that would be fine, actually, if there weren't so many bad actors that are moving at all kinds of hidden persuaders that are doing things to ferment dissent, to ferment all kinds of, I suppose, ill health related kinds of outcomes. Good for their bottom line, but really bad for public health. So this kind of private health, public health debate is real, right? And we know this. So, So I think the people that you're describing are an important, they're both important in animating the potential in the community. They also sort of hold that gap between the overreach of the institution and the potential of the community.
That's really good. That'll get me thinking. I was gonna, I've got Schumacher back there somewhere, but I think his ideas are always timely, maybe more timely now. I want to be mindful of your time. I would like to ask you one more question, and you can make it as brief as you want to. But I think, especially in the last year or two, it's sort of easy to feel pessimistic. But what are some trends, or what is something that has you sort of feeling optimistic, something that has you feeling good about the direction of the world?
Yeah. I suppose what makes me feel good is I really believe that things are not getting worse. They're getting clearer. And with passing time, I am very clear on the work that needs to be done at the associational level. And it's Ivan Illich talked about this idea that friendship suffices, and small acts of renunciation that push against anything that undermines friendship or neighborliness is part of what creates hope. So I'm pretty faithful to the idea that if we get organized and really move into a commitment to each other and the local, that even if everything that is being predicted is true, and there's a good amount of evidence to suggest that, the poly crisis and meta crisis and so on and so forth. But there's, I'm not in the business of denying the reality of that. I think that is true. So tomorrow morning, the world ends. Right. Okay. Where will I be on that day? And I'll be with my family. I'll be with my neighbors. I'll be involved in some kind of cooperative. If I'm older, and it's gone a bit longer than people are predicting, I'll be involved in thinking about aging in place, and I'll be contributing to the well-being of my community and my planet. And if that's the end, then so be it. So my attitude, what gives me hope, is each morning I wake up and I say, okay, so we begin again. There's a lot of stuff that's outside my sphere of influence, and I've been very fortunate over time to build relationships that has broadened my sphere of influence. But I'm seeing all sorts of hope, from the slow food movement to, the conscientization of young people. The fact that we're having conversations now that are non-binary, our willingness to face the fact that institutions are doing harm, the acknowledgement that police can and have publicly and on camera killed people and are doing that right now, and that's often racially motivated. All of those things open up new space, and I feel like we are very much on the cusp of something, and it does feel very, at times, frightening. So what gives me hope is that at that moment, to recognize the fear and then let it go, because the choice is to love. A lot of those that are talking about polycrisis and whatever, I think are doing that in order, I guess, to convey facts, but also to project the value of fear. If people are frightened enough, they will stop behaving badly. I think that's, the attempt. Here's the thing. I think most people do stuff because they care. So if we actually start again to fall in love with each other, to fall in love with the place, to fall in love with the planet and other species, then we will do what needs to be done, and stop the dreams of going to Mars or whatever, but really actually lean in close. While also having a clear eye to the bigger picture. I'm all for, organizing and marching and all that stuff too. It's not an either or, but you got to come home from the march, and you've got to do something in your community that makes what you marched for real. And you're not nobody. Citizens are not crouched over kindling, waiting for somebody else to light their fire. We are somebody. And when we become more organized and we, commit in some way to the democratic franchise, which isn't just about voting every 5 years, but it's about the opportunity to make, to create, to existentially make meaning, to bring beauty into the world. That's how I'm going out. I'm going out with my boots on. And whatever way that comes, it comes. But I can choose to be faithful and not to engage in performative acts or acts that are driven by fear. So that's a choice. And it's a choice that could actually be built into the fabric of coalitions and collectives and dialectical. We have to be dialectical. I don't want to say we shouldn't be fearful, but I just don't want the fear to dominate the love. We have to hold both in paradox, right? Because there are reasons to be fearful and there's reasons to love. But if I act out of that fear and I expect others, nothing's really going to change. It will not create the kind of sustainability that we need in order to thrive.
That's really good. That's really clarifying. I have a feeling I'm going to look over, listen to this podcast again as soon as I've finished, because I think there's a lot that you said there that I actually that does give me a lot of hope. Well,
thank you.
That was really wonderful. I really appreciate your time, and thanks so much. And maybe in a few years we can have you back on again.
That would be lovely. Well, let's stay in touch. As Miles Horton used to say, we make the road by walking it. So best we walk it together.
We're in half term, and that is why there are many children's voices. So that was Cormac Russell. Thank you so much, Cormac, for coming on. We've put loads of links in the show notes, and you can find out much more about him on his website, also linked in the show notes. I hope you enjoyed that and you take time to read some more of Cormac's work. Next week, we are talking to a physio, talking about pain and how we perceive pain. This was on the back of an article that Andrew wrote towards the end of last year when he had his back injury. He was kind of unable to move for the best part of a month, and it was just extremely, extremely sore and a pain that he's never really experienced before, to the point that he didn't really know whether he was ever going to be able to move again. And he's actually all better now. Well, he's much better than he was, and he's got full range of motion back and he's feeling much stronger. But on the back of an article that he wrote about that pain and about the movements that had helped him out of that, and the experts that had helped and the experts that had hindered it, Joanna got in touch. And Joanna actually is a member of Wild Strong Falkland, as well as being a physio, and she's working for the NHS, and she deals a lot with pain and chronic pain. So it's a really interesting conversation about how we deal with pain through our lives. And I think it will resonate with a lot of you. If you've ever had a point in your life where you've been in real extreme pain or chronic pain, or maybe you're going through that at the moment, I think you'll find a lot in that conversation that will resonate with you. All right, have a really good week, and we will see you soon.